Welcome back. This is The Firm. Capacity issues, investigation timelines, confidentiality breaches, merger guidelines, penalty guidelines. At the recent IBA M&A Conference in Mumbai, Payaswini Upadhyay discussed all of these issues with CCI Chairman Ashok Chawla.
At its full strength, the CCI is to have one chairperson and 6 members. So far, it's had only 4. Of these, Geeta Gauri will finish her term this month on the 15th. Anurag Goyal and ML Tayal are due for retirement in August and September. Could the CCI soon lack even a quorum?
Currently, the process to fill up these vacancies which you mentioned is underway in the government.
In September 2010, the Supreme Court in the sale judgment laid down guidelines within which the Director General of Investigation has to submit the investigation report. That 45-day deadline was extended by the CCI to 60 days. But most investigations have taken far longer. Will this 60-day deadline be extended?
2 months is certainly not the optimum or a realistic time limit. We need to look at that. But it's also true that the Director General's office has been taking somewhat longer than they should be taking, in spite of the manpower constraints, in spite of the fact that the organization is not very old. So we have impressed upon them the fact that at the most, they should not take more than 6 months. And that's certainly more than the guidelines of 60 days. But 60 days, I'm afraid, will not give us a very thorough and robust investigation. So we'll need to look at that.
2 years ago, the CCI launched a leniency program, promising immunity and confidentiality to a cartel member that came forward with information. But the first leniency application made headlines in the media, shocking industry and making a mockery of the confidentiality promise.
Well, all I can say at this stage is that we have tightened our processes further. We have identified a senior person who will himself handle every single matter relating to a leniency application and confidentiality in that respect. So we don't think this kind of thing will be repeated. But let me also say, though I have no clear evidence of this, that very often this comes from interested parties who are part of the group outside and perhaps find that somebody is trying to break ranks. So it's possible that it comes from outside. We needn't jump to the conclusion that what appears in the media is necessarily only from the Commission.
I know, sir, but imagine a situation where a company is coming to you with a leniency application. So definitely that company is not going to leak that information. It will definitely make sure that that information doesn't go to the competitors, because the leniency application would give that other competitor also immunity if a cartel or a bid rigging case is investigated. Then is it not a logical conclusion to draw that it's come from the CCI?
Well, I don't think it's a logical conclusion, because in a cartel there could be 4 or 5 members. If somebody breaks ranks, now that person automatically doesn't get leniency. There have been cases where one files for leniency, others immediately enter the door. So they're waiting to see whether the first one makes a full and complete disclosure or not. Only then that first applicant gets the benefit of lower penalty. So it's somewhat up in the air, but I take your point. That is very important if we are really to succeed on the leniency and lesser penalty front, that the systems should be such that nothing goes out from the Commission and we maintain full confidentiality.
In November last year, the Competition Appellate Tribunal dwelled on the powers of the Director General Investigations and limited them to say that the DG cannot go beyond what's mentioned in the order directing investigation. Has this led to a change in CCI's approach?
In the course of the investigation, the DG might find that there is more harm in some other area or in other provision of the law. So I don't think that should preclude him from going into that area. So what we are doing now to prevent this kind of problem arising in terms of the legal architecture and the legal process is that we have started giving a wider mandate to the DG, asking him to look at specific things, but also saying that if there are any other anti-competitive practices which he finds during the course of the investigation, he's free to look at those also.
Okay, so the other aspect is the quality of orders that we've seen coming out from the CCI. And I'll try and make 3 quick points on this. One is, in certain cases, there have been complaints with regards that the Commission is not following the principles of natural justice, and there have been several successful appeals in the higher forum on this. Second is the penalty guidelines. Until we have the compact, telling the regulator that you need to give aggravating and mitigating circumstances, there needs to be penalty guidelines. We couldn't find that in the Commission's order. The third aspect is, you found cartel in the cement company. There was no cartel found in steel and tire sectors. There is a thread of inconsistency that lawyers tell me is there in the reasoning of CCI, and which is why the jurisprudence and the precedent set by each of the orders is really vague. How would you respond to these 3 aspects?
First, let me touch on what is perceived to be similar kind of cases, but maybe somewhat different orders. I don't think that's our appreciation. The facts and circumstances of every case would be different, and the issue really is what is the evidence before us, what has been found. I mean, anecdotally, maybe they may be on the same footing. X industry may be as prone to cartelization as industry Y. But at the point in time when the matter comes before the Commission and when the DG investigates, unless there is adequate evidence, we cannot sort of carry it forward. So I don't think that's the appreciation that we have, that it's entirely on all fours, but there are different orders. On the penalty...
It's a finding price parallelism in one sort of sector based on the same set of circumstances and not finding it in other. It just sort of confuses the jurisprudence, and the reasoning seems a little all over the place, is just my point.
Price parallelism is only one of the dimensions. There are various other dimensions which stem from the behavior, and what's the capacity utilization, whether the capacity utilization has been deliberately suppressed, whether they have met now and then to divide the market, and so on and so forth. So I think we leave it at that at this stage. The other is on the imposition of penalties, and what I have very clearly stated earlier, and the Commission is of that view, that it's a little too early to come out with very specific penalty guidelines at this stage. And we don't intend to do that in the near future. But yes, the penalties imposed in individual cases must adequately articulate the logic, the rationale, and the raison d'etre on the basis of which penalty has been imposed, whether it's high or low, and why it is so. So we'll continue to do that, which is what we regard as important, which is what Compact has also directed us to do in a number of cases. On the third point that you mentioned on the principles of natural justice, I think that is inbuilt into any quasi-judicial process, and we do our best to follow that. But let me also say that every now and then we find a tendency of the stakeholders and the legal community trying to game the system and make sure, because it's in nobody's interest when something is moving in a certain direction, it's not in their interest to get an order which is likely to be adverse from the Commission. So there's an attempt to game the system, and if we go along the whole route on that way, then we will probably never end up deciding cases, and we would then be in serious danger of becoming like civil courts, which is not the intention of the legislature, and that is why economic regulatory bodies of this kind, which will investigate and enforce, have been set up.
One long-standing concern has been on the different timelines prescribed by CCI's merger control regulations and SEBI's takeover code. The competition regulator has 210 days for merger approval, but under the takeover code, the tendering process has to kick off after 12 days of SEBI approval. If an offerer gets SEBI approval but not CCI's, then the open offer could get delayed and tendering shareholders would need to be paid interest by the acquirer. Have the CCI and SEBI consulted on how to fix this?
On the timelines which we follow under our law and under our act, and what SEBI follows under its takeover regulations. There is an asymmetry in the timelines. I mean, we may take longer.
Right.
SEBI might decide it sooner, and the parties would then have to pay within a certain number of days to the public shareholders. If they don't, then the company will be required to pay interest on that. That's something which we are in talks with the Securities and Exchange Board. It's at the moment theoretical because it hasn't really happened, I think, in any case. But maybe at some stage that needs to be looked at, and that will have to be looked at by SEBI because it's part of their regulations, whereas our timelines are statutory. So we are not in a position to change those timelines unless Parliament chooses to amend the law.
In 1968, the US Department of Justice issued its first set of merger guidelines. Since then, they have been updated numerous times to reflect evolving jurisprudence and enforcement policy. The European Union follows a similar practice. Will India follow suit?
Well, 2 years is certainly not a very long period of time. It's relatively short. And I don't think our precedents and the cases that we have handled are sufficient to enable us to put out very straight-jacketed guidelines. So let me be honest and upfront that we are not going to put out merger guidelines in the near future. Maybe those will come 2 years, 3 years down the road. But what we are now starting, and this is going to start immediately, is going to be announced, is that we are open for pre-merger filing consultations on substantive issues, not just the procedural issues which we followed in the past. But now companies can engage with our officers on informal consultations on the merger substantive provision.
In 2011, the government notified filing thresholds for deals to come under the scrutiny of merger control regulations. Transactions below the prescribed thresholds do not need to file with the CCI. The notifications apply for a 5-year period ending 2016.
Do you feel that this is the right time to probably look at the thresholds again? Basically, if you feel that a lot of deals are not coming before the Commission or do not require CCI approval because of higher thresholds, do you think it is a good time to look at the thresholds as well?
Thresholds is something which the government or the Parliament can decide, but there is a notification which was issued when these guidelines, when the provisions of M&A were enforced in June 2011. Now the validity of that is 5 years. So that will end sometime in 2016. And that was consciously done so that industry gets used to this regime. So I suppose there would be a good case from our point of view at least. I'm not sure what decision will be taken by the government then. But I think it will be a good case to not extend that notification, because in any case that then takes a lot of acquisitions out of the process of review by the market regulator.
You can watch that full interview on thefirm.moneycontrol.com. You can also write to us via email, Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn. That's all we have for you this week. Thanks very much for watching. We'll be back next week.